Where do we go when the beds are burning?
Dum,
Dum, dum.
How do we sleep while our beds are burning?
Welcome to UberCube, the podcast where we discuss all things Cube, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, aka UberBear, and today I'm joined by my other singing host.
This is Stu. Welcome to the show.
And our awesome host,
May, also known as Magic. I think awesome's overselling it. Chaotic gremlin that you keep in the closet sometimes. You just pull me out on occasions like, all right, May, it's time to record. And I just start winding up like
everybody
the
needs a man
Energizer Bunny.
May the green screen goblin. Got it. So we got an interesting episode, but I thought it'd be kind of nice to recap a little old school that I've been doing this week. I didn't even realize it was old. And because of the recent Fallout series coming out, and because of the Universes Beyond that we talked about during the Pleasant Kenobi episode, I started replaying Fallout New Vegas. And I even realized, coincidentally, my little brother visited the town, and I'm like, man, I really beat the mess out of Fallout 4. And he's like, no, you didn't. And I'm like, yes, I did. And I didn't even realize that I was talking about Fallout 3 the whole time. So I basically have two video games that I've been replaying all this week. And man, I've been jamming it, and I'm trying to be the nicest person in the world. First time ever doing that on a video game, saying yes to everyone while playing Fallout New Vegas. Man, I'm loving it. Did you ever play that at all, Stu?
First of all, I'm jealous that you have that kind of time to play multiple video games.
It's 25-minute little burst.
Yeah, I don't have that kind of time. Right. Well, coming up, I do. Like holiday chaos and madness is all, kind of quieting down. But no, I've never played any of the Fallout. This has come up in conversation. I've never played a Fallout game. I've never played Skyrim. I've never played like Elder Scrolls or a Dark Souls game or any of that kind of stuff. I've never played World of Warcraft. Maybe that, means I'm a little sheltered in the old video game department. But no, to answer your question, I've never played those.
How about yourself, May? Ever play Fallout?
No, I've never played Fallout.
Interesting fact, this has nothing to do with the episode. I just thought it'd be fun to talk about our week a little bit. But I've been really absorbed in the world of Fallout because of the series and the Universe Beyond. It's just been a thing that I've been doing to get a little release in between, the recording of the podcast and the family life and the work life and all the things we do in the writing. I just thought it would be nice to do something a little different and shake it up. And Bethesda released it forever ago. Yeah, and it still holds up, man. I love that game.
Well, I'm going to recap something real quick from my week. This was a promise I made to someone a long time ago. And May, I'm going to hold it up for you in our little camera as we're recording. I finally, after digging through decks and boxes, I promised May that I would send her a Bitter Blossom. It's here in a sleeve. As soon as I can get to a post office, it's coming your way.
As long as it's not that secret lair that you promised never to sell to me ever.
That is still unboxed, sitting in a location that I will not divulge to you because I'm sure you'll steal it. But no, that's still pristine.
But that's nothing to do, as I said, what we're going to talk about. I just thought it'd be fun to loosen up, get ready for the recording. What we're actually going to talk about is knowledge is power. And Stu has written this episode. It's an interesting one. He's been ruminating and writing this one for a while. So.
What is the old saying about knowledge, Anthony?
Besides knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power.
By Francis Bacon, yes, and also
and
Thomas
when
Hobbes.
mages are asked how much more power they require, they will always respond, more.
More.
The one that I find more interesting is actually by our good friend of the show, Albert Einstein.
Old Al.
You may have seen him recently in Oppenheimer. He was hanging out, gave us a few shout-outs during the film, right?
Sure did.
Yeah, he's like, UberCube. But imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited to all we now know and understand, while imagination embraces the entire world and all there ever will be to know and understand.
Kind of feel that covers sort of two aspects, part of the cube process and part of the episode today. Like imagination, definitely pretty important talent to have when it comes to cube design, cube curation. But I like the knowledge side of things, and that's what we're going to cover today.
But before we go any further down this weird tangential conversation we just had, we're going to do the thing that we always do here at UberCube, and we are going to have our libations of the show. We're going to start out with our amazing host.
May, what you got today?
I am having a tea because I'm trying to avoid some alcohol so I can enjoy some wine later. I just have jasmine tea with hibiscus, and it's both imported. So
Very nice.
my fancy pantsy little tea.
Got to kick that pinky out real hard. There we go. All right, so I've got me an interesting. It's a cashmere IPA. It's a new one from New Belgium that I was pretty excited to pick up, and it's delicious. What do you got, Stu?
I got me a New Belgium Voodoo Ranger IPA. This is kind of a classic of mine.
All right, let's crack them and get to Stu's episode.
So, just as Anthony alluded to, knowledge is power, right? So, what are we talking about with knowledge? Typically, in a game of Magic, what do you know about what your opponent's got, right? Kind of see what's on the battlefield, see their lands, see their creatures, see their graveyard, see their exile. A lot of public zones and private zones. There's one private zone that is always just so mysterious. I want to get my eyes on it. What you got?
You're not going to look at my hand, are you?
I would love to look at your hand.
Oh, no.
Have you ever, in a game, against a new player, I'm going to ask that to all the people who are listening, have you ever, against a new player, tried to trick them? Like, hey, I don't know if you could, hey, show me your hand real quick. Can I just see what you got in your hand? Oh, okay, thank you very much. You ever tried to trick a player to do that? Anthony, I'm looking at you because I remember you doing this.
Long pause will remain in editing. Yes, I may have done that. Another tangential story. I not that I do this in my old years, but I may have cheated at a few games in my previous life. My little sister and I used to play Trivial Pursuit when we were kids all the time, and she couldn't figure out why I kept getting all the pies. That's because secretly I would hide, as I sat with my legs crossed, a mirror down there, and I would hover the card over so I could read the back of the card in the mirror.
That is disgusting.
Knowledge is power.
That is egregious in a family game of Trivial Pursuit.
My little sister. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Stu and I have already come to a decision. You've been voted off the island.
Yeah, I respect it, but that's awful.
So I have a question for May, actually, about the knowledge and about the viewing of your opponent's hand. Do you believe, May, that the knowledge of your opponent's hand increases your individual win rates?
Yes. No, just outright. I've actually was thinking about it a lot yesterday, where I was just kind of in my little zone and just being like, I don't think enough people talk about how broken like Cataxian Probe is just as a card. Like, we're going to talk about it more in a second, but just being able to effectively pay no mana, look at your opponent's hand is so huge. Even when you can't like actively remove it in a proactive way, like with say Thoughtseize or whatnot, things we're going to talk about later. But even if we're not able to proactively remove those things, there is a reason why telepathy has been like considered in Commander, or Thoughtseize is like a namestay in a lot of 60 card formats and whatnot.
I used to play
telepathy. Such an important
is not a nice Magic card.
I used to play telepathy in an old. It was the enchantment commander, Zur the Enchanter. I used to play telepathy in that. And
classic.
It's kind of broken, right? The ability to get that much information. Obviously, in a 4-player game, you're also giving that information to 3 people, right? 3 people are able to see 3 people's hands. But now we're talking about Cube. We're talking about a one-on-one format, right?
Yep.
And it leads to an interesting discussion about how does that impact, right? And we'll start out with the fun, right? How much does it impact the fun of a game of Magic when you know what is in your opponent's hand? And this doesn't necessarily have to be an ongoing effect like telepathy does. How about just a single effect, right? Where you just get to peek at your opponent's hand, right? In a competitive environment, you're going to write down those cards. Typically in a casual environment, I'll say, okay, sure, I'll just lay the cards out in front of me that you know of. And then when I draw additional cards, I'll just pick them up and put them in my hand and hide those. How much does that impact the fun? Anthony, for you, either way, like either when you've had your hand looked at or when you've looked at an opponent's hand, how does that impact the fun that you're having in that game?
I think it's fun because I think it's like a well-developed part of the strategy of the game. So the game's not linear. And then, as you said, either writing down what you have observed or your opponent has laid them out so that you can keep that mental image of what you're doing. Or you have to then kind of do that, put a pin in it and remember what they had. All 3 of those are different like dynamics within the game of Magic that I think I personally find is fascinating, right? For the one-time situation.
Yeah.
When you talked about the card telepathy, when everybody has to expose their hands and play with their hands out.
with your hands
That's
revealed.
a completely different type of game. That essentially breaks the game of Magic for me personally. But stuff where you get that one-time glimpse into what their strategy is, it's only good enough for that moment. It's like a snapshot in time where I got to see where May, as the opposition across the table, is basically her strategy she's building up to, so that I can then kind of tool or equip for that. I kind of think that is a very in-depth strategy, and I don't think it, detracts from the fun personally. But then it kind of bodes the question, and I'm skipping through the show notes a little bit here, is the fun secretly hidden in the lack of knowledge, right? That hidden information, is that part of the fun? And I think that's a very subjective. And then the next one will be, does it ruin the game? For me personally, it doesn't. I think it adds an interesting layer, opposed to like a traditional game like, say, Uno, where you never quite know what they have. You just keep filling their hands, tell them to draw 4, they fill up with more, and it's unknown information until they win the game. I think that's a very linear type of play style, versus Magic has that zone depth where now I can just get that little snapshot. What are you dealing with over here? Okay, cool. This is the threats presented before me. Now I can be tactical about my decisions. Do you both agree with that statement? What is your viewpoint, May?
I wanted to ask May about that. Like, let's go to I don't say ruin the game. Maybe that is a little, a little over the top, like, extreme way of putting it. But May, do you think that it has such a detrimental effect that it could ruin the game, or even a particularly detrimental effect on a game for you when you have that information, or for you when you have to give it up?
Yes.
And
no, right. It's detrimental to have your information shown. And Magic may not be as bluff-centric as poker, but bluffing is a large part of this game, and being able to efficiently use your resources in order to imply actions or positions that you don't have or could have is a big aspect of this game. And there was a lot of points where even pro players talked about how just scooping to after a Thoughtseize was sometimes a considerable decision if it was just that matchup.
Yeah, you can see that, how much of an impact just having that information can be. And I will say, I remember going all the way back, when I first saw Thoughtseize as a little youngling, right, very, very new to Magic, I thought this card was absolute nonsense. I was like, there's no way that this can be fun. There's no way that this can be, like, not just absurdly powerful, right? The amount, like, information really is power in a game of Magic. And I thought, there's no way that just for only 1 mana, it's not even card disadvantage, it's 1 card of yours for 1 card of your opponent's. You get to take the best card, the most impactful card, the card that can have the most detrimental impact to your game plan, or the most powerful impact on their game plan, for only 1 mana, right? And only 2 life in the case of something like Thoughtseize. I really disliked it. My opinion of it has changed, and I will say, nowadays, when I've played against it, I don't feel like it's an unfun thing. If I get Thoughtseized, okay, I'll just put my cards out. There you go. You can see them. We're not playing for money when we're drafting. But I think it's been kind of a fluid opinion of that kind of effect for me over the years.
I would go with those type of effects actually inspire like robust deck building, opposed to like glass cannon deck building. If you've got one key component, let's just say Doomsday or something like that, that is the engine that you're relying on, you need this piece, or tendrils or whatever. It's the one thing that's going to complete this mission for you. And I know there's ways to get them back and retrieve them, because people do that. But it also, when you have this ability to go into that zone, and I can take a peek at May's hand, then it encourages like advanced deck building where they have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. I was actually watching a video with LSV today, actually, and he was doing a Doomsday type of play style, but simultaneously he had tendrils, but then simultaneously he was doing a reanimator deck, and simultaneously he was doing a Thassa's Oracle, all in the same deck. He had a plan A, a plan C, a plan B, and a plan D, all embedded within that. So if you took a key component out, he had something he could just transition to try to make that deck maneuver and continue. So I think it inspires, when you have that access to the hand, it inspires players to draft their cubes a little bit more robust and not just go 1, 2, 3 haymakers and hope they can lean on that too much. And if you take those parts out, they got no way to get it right. Or if they're doing a reanimator strategy with only one reanimator component, they've kind of done this to themselves inadvertently. And when you take that out, they now have to hardcast it. I mean, it's kind of a lesson learned on all avenues there, and that it's an invasion of that zone, but I think it makes the game more dynamic. May, you have a thought?
Yeah, so when it comes to how these interact in terms of the format of Cube, is that limited is a different beast. You're not going to be having full playset of these types of cards, and the way that we usually fill out that kind of roster of hand control is that we'll have different options that are around either the same mana cost or better versions of what you currently have, if that makes sense. So you're paying more for a better version, if that makes sense. So we start off with like Duress, right? Duress is used a lot in the cubes, and with a lot of curators tend to lean on it because it's cheaper, it's more affordable than things like Thoughtseize, etc. And it's just generally good for being able to answer things like counterspells or make sure that it's clear to actually play your big bombs for the turns. There are a lot of good use cases for it, but you're just not going to have the density unless you're breaking Singleton.
And for those that are new to the game, we do have new cubers and new Magic players that have, or those that have actually, I saw another one today on the MTG post that said, I haven't played this game in like 15, 20 years. I'm coming back into the fold. So some of these terms might not make a lot of sense to them. Mm-hmm. We won't read all of these, but Duress is kind of a namestay. And it would be Duress for one swamp. You get a sorcery, target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-creature, non-land card from it. That player discards that card. So there is definitely a positivity of this card because it says non-creature. You'll find that a lot of people avoid the idea of creature because of, we talked about our good friend Reanimator and strategies that are looking to actually capitalize on their graveyards, whereas Duress oftentimes gets the components like the
enablers,
Dance from the Dead, or these type cards,
Exhume,
or whatever.
Animate Dead,
yeah, so it lets you get these cards or attempt to get these cards out of their hand before they can actually fire off. And as May alluded, the counterspell. So Duress is just a nice steady state card that I think holds its own, and it's common. So you'll see this at all cube levels, thematic designs. I run it virtually in every cube I have with various arts fitting the theme, right? The horror cube will have this art, and the artifact cube will have this art, and the fem cube will have this art, and so on and so forth, right? Because it's been reprinted into oblivion.
Yes.
But this card is actually expected in the game. So I think it's an acceptable form of strategy that I think players have come into this idea, maybe in the way back. They didn't like you. As we all kind of talked about, please don't look at my hand. It's not your business. This is my strategy. Don't interrupt my gameplay. Now the Magic community as a whole, in my opinion, has accepted that this is an advanced strategy or game state. It's a welcome area to invade.
I think it's important to look at the scope of these cards and how they impact your formats and etc. in terms of Cube as these hand control cards, these information cards, however we want to explain them, their power diminishes throughout the game. Where on the first turn, if you're able to look at their hand, take whatever their best card is, because they mulligan that hand. They chose to keep that hand for something in there, and you are denying them that piece. Versus several turns down the line, they might not even have a hand for you to look at. It is one of the few cases where it's not a directly static, powerful effect as much as it's very, very strong highs and very, very weak lows.
And that's actually why I choose as a curator to limit the density in a lot of my cubes. I generally will have 3 to 4. Oftentimes they'll be relegated mostly to black, sometimes blue, the peaking type stuff, which we'll talk about. But I want to make sure that also the players get to play the game. There is, agree or disagree, but there is a fun factor in the fact that sometimes if you have too many of these type effects or cards that do this in your environment, you do run the risk of non-games, because the hand stripping can be fun once, maybe twice. But as May alluded to, if she mulliganed down and she was banking on that talisman or that signet to carry her to her, turn 3 play, and then I opened whatever with Duress, etc., and I stripped that out. I've one times queued twice as a game, but there's a point where you're not doing this interchange of a game whenever I'm just taking out your key component to even move forward. There's a lot to unpack there.
I've had the same problem with removal.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
I've had the same problem with a Burst Lightning on my Bird of Paradise that I cast turn 1, and all I had in my hand was 2 drops. I had no other land. game's over. I didn't cast another spell for the rest of the game.
You always
top
bolt the
deck around.
bird, though. Refer to that episode.
Of course. Always bolt the bird. Always.
Yeah,
The fixing, the acceleration, everything. But that I was so heavily relying on that Birds of Paradise being on the battlefield. And I think the next hand or the next turn, I was able, or I would have been able to put out a talisman or a signet or whatever and get a bit of action going. But just that one, that one piece of interaction that the opponent had that completely took me off the game.
So a counterpoint to this, and it's kind of is tangential to what we're talking about. At CubeCon, we kind of joked about this. I had a drafter that was drafting a game where he manatized someone, and his opponent decided to announce the entire table, such and such player has manatized. And I apologize, I can't remember the name of the individual. And he was grateful for that because everybody at the table then played around this force spike type manatithe. Basically, he told me it's like having a Thalia on the field, even though you didn't have one. Simultaneously, on the first game, if someone duresses you to take out your signet, I'm hoping that you, as the drafter on the second hand, has now learned that lesson that maybe you shouldn't be so greedy or so lean on that hand.
I'm taking it out of my deck. I'm straight up. If everybody knows I've got Mana Tithe, I'm taking it out of my deck. I don't need it anymore. Just the psychological effect at that point is probably enough.
Well, same thing with duress. Once you've dropped it once, it's got them on the play, but the next time, whenever they take over, they're on the play. So duress has now been devalued in these type of cards because that information has now moved into multiple hands. That's where May said the diminishing returns of these type cards come into effect over time. These are great early game plays. Sure, they're late game plays as well, too, if you got a really big, like a Live the Dream where you're doing these huge plays. But at the same time, these are really powerful, especially from like the aggro style. And that was one of the things, too. I want to pose a question to both of you and to the audience. Does hand stripping or hand investigation, or whatever we want to call it, the knowledge, does that benefit the aggro style players or the control players the most?
I think it depends very much on the cube. Yeah, I think the more you've got a tighter game plan to protect, I think that's when it can become much more devastating. I think if you've got a lot of redundancy in the ways that you are trying to win the game. If you're a typical aggro package and you can just flood the board with creatures and, hey, you can take that creature, I don't care. I've got 3 or 4 more in my hand that are going to come right behind it. I don't think the impact is quite as high. But again, going back, if you've got very combo-centric game plan and getting stripped of that Doomsday or a Brain Freeze or an Underworld Breach or a Lion's Eye Diamond or whatever the case may be, if that's going to be so impactful to your game plan, you don't have to set back a player for 50 turns. Sometimes just setting them back 2 or 3 turns is enough to snowball you to win the game.
I was just going to say, sometimes it's just enough to be able to just look at your opponent's hands to figure out, hey, is it safe for me to storm right now? Hey, is it safe for me to put down my combo pieces? And being able to either deny them their counterspells or deny them their interaction, or just in the case of peak type effects of just, all right, I'm doing my cantrip, I'm going to see if I can do the thing. Yep, I can do the thing. Time to storm.
And gameplay dynamic is something that I think should be considered as well, right? Typically, when I look at my hand, I'm someone who likes to plan ahead a little bit, right? Like, there is my 2-drop, there is my 3-drop. This is what I want to do on those turns. If I know that what is in my opponent's hand could disrupt my game plan, then I can start to think, okay, I've got this in my hand. They've got a counter spell. I know because I duressed them, or I know because I thought seized them. And I didn't take that card because I've got something that I could bait them. I can shift the strategy of how I'm going to play my cards in order to look to bait out a counter spell or a piece of removal. And then that will be advantageous for me moving forward. So I think, again, there's a lot of implications for these kind of effects.
And I'm going to add that this is not a strategy or a type of play that belongs in every environment, right?
No.
Like, it's a very choice type of thing that you as the curator has to choose whether or not you want this level of interaction. Do you want this hand information? In the case of the Monopoly that I've been building, I don't have any hand stripping. I don't have any viewing of the hand in there. Not to the best of my knowledge. At least that's where I believe I stand. It was intentional. Same as I don't have any like land destruction in the 2-headed giant cube. You can be very choice in the type of strategies you want in your cube environment. But whenever you add this type of element to your cube, you're not only increasing the power level or the dynamics of the cube, you're making it so there's more interaction. And that's what ultimately, this may seem like less interactive on the surface by the definition of that, right? But you are interacting with your opponent. They may not feel that they're being interacted with, but you are doing an advanced gameplay strategy that's causing changes to the way the outcome would be. So not everybody's min-maxing, and that's where these really come online. In the case of the Horror Cube, I currently run Duress, Inquisition of Kozilek, and Thoughtseize.
The classics.
Yes, these are, and that's kind of what Stu just said it. These are the classics. These are the ones that are going to come to mind most often when people talk about hand stripping or investigation of your hand or knowledge, right?
Yep.
But it also, this has come up oftentimes too, do these obscure a draft or taint a draft in such a way that these cards are so powerful? And I'm going to go ahead and answer my own question with yes, that whenever you see these come up in a pack one, pick one, these are hard not to choose because players understand that when they're on the play, if they have access to 1, 2, or 3 of these, that they have a strong component to interrupt a game strategy before it even takes off.
I would say that, let's just say from a vintage cube perspective, right? I am not going to take these super highly on a pick one, pack one. I am much more going to look at power, obviously. I'm going to look at broken cards like your Atraxas and Entombs, Enablers, that kind of stuff, Oko. And then I'm going to look at very, very strong mana fixing, right? Fetch lands. I value all of those things much higher than I do any kind of hand disruption like a Thoughtseize or an Inquisition or Duress. However, if I'm in a lane where these cards are going to be not just playable, but impactful, either to protect my strategy or because I think it will be important to protect my own, right? Or to disrupt my opponents, I should say, then I'm going to look to take these pretty highly.
All right, so May, what you can do, and May's very familiar with this, you can customize these type of ideas, these hand knowledge to your particular cube environments. In the case where I had the big 3 in Uberbear's Horror Cube, which I realized they fill a generic niche, but there was also artistic requirements and stuff like that. And the reasons why I chose them is because I wanted that advanced dynamic gameplay mixed in with the werewolves, admittedly so. But in Uberbear's Artifact Cube, I kind of have a mix of these. I still have the Duress, but I have 2 in particular that are very interesting. As a matter of fact, I do have Inquisition of Kozilek, so topping out my 4 that I've been talking about. But in this case, May, would you mind talking to the listeners about these 2 particular cards that fit an artifact or some type of theme like that, where you can theme these ideas out?
Sure. So, I guess we'll talk about the first one, Divest. So Divest is a 1-mana black sorcery. Reveal the hand, it hits artifacts and creatures. And what's cool about it in the context of a lot of environments where, say, your artifact cube, this effectively is as good as a Thoughtseize in a lot of cases because you can directly target pretty much most of the relevant cards in your cube. And so the card that you just introduced me to, which is going to be a little bit of a mouthful, but Dreams of Steel and Oil, which is also a sorcery, but also affects artifacts and creatures. The difference is that you can also choose one from their graveyard, and it exiles those cards. And that is huge.
Bum, bum, bum. Stu, where do we go when our beds are burning?
The world is turning.
Little reference to
How do we sleep while our beds are burning?
Yeah.
I'm going to say, I just was introduced to this card today as well, Dreams of Steel and Oil, and I will admit I have not been as actively looking at the newer cards as typically I would in the past. You know, life gets in the way. This is pretty nutty. For 1 mana, getting to, you know, it is an artifact or creature, a lot of cubes. Maybe it's not quite as impactful, but I really don't know. There's, you know, at the very high power level, both artifacts and creatures are super strong. And then getting to exile something from a graveyard, also an artifact or creature card, that's a really, really strong effect for only 1 mana. I think this card is great.
It's actually showing up in vintage power cubes.
And
now.
it's uncommon.
It's really good in peasant cubes, artifact cubes. But you can see how you can take these certain type of strategies that we've talked about, and you can meld them to what you're trying to do in your thematic environments, right? There's so many of these been printed with different styles where it's been a faux pas in the past to say, like, well, discard target creature, put it into your yard, right? Like, people don't want to do that because it incentivizes the reanimator player to do the thing, right? Or in the case, we'll even say the ones that we talked about before with like Divest, where a Felden player really would like for you to put their Triplicate Titan in their yard because they're going to capitalize on that.
They sure would.
But simultaneously, you can see where if your environment doesn't host a reanimator package, that these cards suddenly go up, up, up in value, right? Would you agree with that, May?
Yeah. But one thing that's important to note is that since a lot of these are going to be in black as its main identity, an interesting thing to note is that black has such a large suite of removal that targeting creatures and getting them into their graveyard, aside from a lot of decks use their graveyard as a second hand nowadays. Aside from that, Black's already has like a huge suite of removal options, and spending a mana just to get something preemptively into the graveyard that you could just remove later sometimes is relevant. Because denying somebody their ETB triggers, denying somebody of their uncounterable spells, things that you might not be able to actually answer later, so things that have hexproof, ward, shroud, etc. So there is a lot of different avenues that you can consider when you're building your environment and building your hand control suite and how powerful you're wanting that suite to be.
And using black, if we were just doing a glass cannon-y, mono black type suite, it's common knowledge at this point, with the exception of a few cards, that enchantments is the bane of black, right? This allows black to preemptively get in there and remove certain components. In this case, like maybe even counterspells, right? Like you got your Haymaker. But let's say we wanted to strip the opponent's hand of a key, component or an enchantment that we can't, once it enters the battlefield, we can no longer interact with because we're in that state, right?
Exactly.
We've chosen that path. That's where these cards create that level of dynamics too, that I think that curators should look at. Again, limiting the volume of these, I think, is very key, but simultaneously, I think these add a whole different layer and depth to the game of Magic, in my personal opinion.
Yep, agreed. All right, so as always, we're going to include our show notes in our Discord for this episode. I've got a bunch of numbers when it comes to some of these hand disruption options. The classics are always going to be included, right? So we've got Thoughtseize in there, Inquisition of Kozilek, Duress, so on and so forth. The numbers are not surprising. So Thoughtseize, very strong representation, certainly in the higher number of cubes, almost 30% from 361 to 450. 43%, almost 44% in 451 to 440. Duress, similar-ish, 47% in 451 to 540, 34% in 361 to 450. And Inquisition of Kozilek, almost 30% in 360 to 450, and 42% or 41% in 451 to 540. So these are well-established numbers. They're in a lot of cubes around that size. They're well-known. They're well-used. Curators like them.
And we're naming these numbers. We're talking about there are dozens. There are dozens of us.
And these are pulled directly from Cube Cobra.
Yes.
These numbers, this was literally go into Cube Cobra, pull those cards. Let's find out how many cubes in Cube Cobra show these cards within the list.
You can see that cards like Inquisition Kozilek, for example, or Kozilek, choose your words, right? The Garuk, whatever. Garrick. You can see where these type of cards are so impactful. Whenever I say they're in 18% or 30%, those numbers don't mean a lot. But when he's pulling those numbers from Cube Cobra, you're looking at 5,000 cubes out of 31,000 that has at 360 and 180 that has that suite.
That's almost 20%.
That card.
That's
significant. It's a large volume of curators are actually including these because they like that dynamic, that style of play.
Exactly.
It's not suggesting that these cards are for everyone, right? Like
right.
Gataxian Probe, for example. I recently cut that from Uberbear's Artifact Cube. It was brought up at the last CubeCon that this card maybe was invading on the fun factor because of the freeness of it. And for those people that aren't familiar, Gataxian Probe for 1 blue Phyrexian mana, which you can pay 2 life for opposed to paying the blue, is a sorcery. Look at target player's hand and then draw a card.
So you get the information, you don't get the stripping.
Yes, and you don't get the stripping, but you definitely net a card. You replace the card, right?
And that kind of goes to show how outrageously powerful the information is, right? Because you don't get to take a card. Thoughtseize is very, very powerful. Duress is very, very powerful. You get to take a card of your choice. Players play this card, even though all you get to do is get the information. Replacing itself really is just ridiculous gravy. But all you do is get that information, and yet Gitaxian Probe is obviously a very, very highly thought of card. So kind of gives you an idea, like, this is a very, very strong effect.
It's a very powerful cantrip is the way I look at it.
Exactly.
Like, with information included. May, do you have a thought?
Yes. Stu, you've done me a great disservice. Now that we are talking a little bit about blues, peaks, and Gitaxian Probe, you've done me a great disservice by not representing the fairy hand control option, Vendilion Click.
Oh, that is true. Yep.
Vendilion Click was in there.
You get that hand knowledge, you get that interaction.
And I actually think it's this one here.
Vendilion Click is actually amazing because a lot of players will play this during the upkeep of their opponent or during the draw step, so they get to see whenever that card gets transitioned, and they can choose if they want them to keep that card, boot out the old card, get the information, and then the unknown presence of information now through the draw comes into effect, right? So that creates a whole nother layer of dynamics for the game of Magic, where I saw what May had. I got rid of the thing that scared me the most, but I don't know if she just drew another haymaker or just a land, right?
Well,
it's a dynamic of Magic.
It is. Well, May, let's talk about that, right? Because Vendilion Click, Fairy, goes real nice thematically in the Fey Cube. Is it in there?
No, absolutely not.
Why
it's expensive.
not? Okay, so it's a classic.
Ignoring the
let's
fact
say it was
that it's a $5 card right now, which is not that expensive.
Would you
compared to where it
include
used
it?
to be. No.
Is it just too powerful?
It's just too powerful.
Okay, that's reasonable for However, is it because the effect of having the information is too powerful, or is the density of threats measured in such a way within the cube that the impact of being able to tuck a card too strong for the cube?
The fact that you can tuck a card is what makes it too strong.
Interesting.
So that's a secondary decision that you made as a curator. So what we've kind of profiled with these type of interactions is question number one was, is this fun? Yes or no for your play group, right? Like, do they like the information basically being taken away from them and provided to the group, right? Like, I want to see what you got. And then also, does it fit your thematic requirements? In the case of like the Horror Cube, when I chose the card Duress, it's been reprinted, as we said, to Oblivion. I was able to pick certain images that made sense from a Gothic horror standpoint that fit those requirements. But then May, loving the fairies, right? But still disqualifies the card based on the power attributes of Vendilion Click. And these are all choices, right?
Yeah, and Vendilion Click is a well-established, very, very powerful card. So let's, as we always like to do, let's provide a little bit of a parallel, right? A comparison card. So we have Entomber Exarch. This is a 2 colorless, 2 black creature cleric, Fey Cube. Hint, hint.
Cleric, yep.
When Entomber Exarch enters the battlefield, choose one. So as soon as you say choose one, I'm in it to win it, baby, because now I got options. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-creature card from it. That player discards that card.
You guys can't see May shaking her head just nonstop while Stu's saying, May, we'd love your insights as to why, besides the art is just grisly, why are you not running this in the Fey Cube?
Ah, yes. Why am I not throwing in the random Phyrexian Cleric into the Fey Cube? The themes are just so right there. I will also note that being a 4-drop without flash is way different from being a 3-drop with.
Sure is.
There you go. No evasion.
I will also add that the reason that I wanted to bring up Vendilion Click and why we're talking about it in blue is that the way that blue interacts with that information tends to be not really a proactive way of using that information. It's more of a, all right, you now have information. It's either with the peak, Gitaxian Probe, insert whatever blue effect to look at your opponent's hand, telepathy, take your pick. But Vendilion Click is one of the few times in blue that you proactively get to get rid of something. It doesn't go to the graveyard, it doesn't go to exile, it goes straight to their deck. And I would dare to say it's a color pie break, in a way. It is just not something that people expect in blue.
Yeah, it's incredibly disruptive, right? And Entomber Exarch, like I mentioned, that is a discard effect. That is much more within the black color pie. It's a weak card. Is it a bad card?
Yeah. It's okay.
No, it's not. It's a terrible card.
It's okay. But if you're doing low powered, it makes sense, right? I mean, or
it has this. Look, it has this effect. It has the information. It has two different options: returning a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. That's a nice effect. It's a 2/2 for 4 mana with that effect. Okay, I can buy in with that. And you get the information and the discard ability. That's not too bad, right? But let's look at the numbers. 361 to 450 size cubes, 2.9%, just 394 out of over 13,500 cubes, 451 to 540 cubes, less than 4% of cubes, 447 to 12,320. I'll ask you out there, dear listener, I'll ask you guys, what does this tell you? Does this tell you that just this card in a standalone is just not even remotely good enough for cubes out there, even a lower powered cube? Or does it mean that outside of those broken sort of showcase cards like the Inquisitions and the Thoughtseizes and the Vendilion Clicks, that people maybe don't care about this effect as much as they do outside of those cards?
There's quite a few things to unpack here. It's the fact that it costs 2 colorless and 2 black, right? It's already competing with that 4 mana value slot, which oftentimes, even in the low powered type of
we're not talking about Sheoldred here. We're not comparing this to Sheoldred.
Even so, it's the cards that actually make this is not as impactful. This is not a bomb. This is not going to win you games because the stats are 2/2, right? Even though you've done this amazing trick of getting rid of May's amazing card and you've done the thing, right? Congratulations. You still haven't actually got a game-winning piece on the board for the cost that you've invested, right? You'd have to have a cube that goes so far up the mana value spectrum for this to actually start. It's a direct correlation to the mana value or the speed or the curve that even makes this card powerful. If you started your games at 4, this is cool.
I agree.
You don't start your games at 4. Nobody does that. Not really.
No, you're absolutely correct, and you're answering everything the way I expected, right? It's 4 mana. It's way too slow for an effect of this kind. Blue, even at 3 mana, like Vendilion Click, it's a great card. It's a flyer. It comes in at flash. You can do it at upkeep, right? Or you can do it at the end of the draw step, right? So you've got max value. It's still, it's not 4 mana slow. 3 mana there's a huge difference between 3 and 4 mana, right? And having that flash and having it attached to a 3 mana flyer.
There's a huge, even bigger difference between 1 mana and 3 mana.
Sure. Agree 100%. Maybe this is because it's on a stick. Maybe it's because, again, you can do it at instant speed, which you cannot do with Thoughtseize or Inquisition or Duress outside of some extraneous ability. And in Tomb Exarch, even with that ability, even with giving that player that information of what's in an opponent's hand and the ability to discard that card, it's just not good enough at 4 mana. If this was a 3/3 or a 4/4, would it be good enough then? Possibly, because then you're getting a pretty good value on the creature side of things. But as a 2/2 for 4, even with that effect, it's obviously just not good enough.
And it's competing with, in its own right, as of recent, right? Because we don't talk about power creep, but power creep is real, right? In the way back, this card probably would have been devastating. But you're talking about like Gonti, Lord of Luxury now, right? And the same mana slot for the same cost that gives you actually access to your opponent's board state, right?
Absolutely.
Like information from their deck.
Well, we can ask May, right? Go and look at your 4-drops. You've talked about the power band within your Fey Cube. And I will say this to other cube curators out there that are listening. Go and look at that 4 CMC band and look at this card in comparison to those. Does it come close? Does that kind of effect warrant inclusion at that CMC?
I think it's an interesting point.
Probably not.
Because like using like the Duresses or the Divest and all these type cards, right? People don't want to overly invest in that idea because like you don't even know what you're going to get, right? Because may have a handful of creatures and I cast a Duress on her, right? And sure, I get to see May's got a handful of creatures and some lands, but all I really know is that death is coming, right? That's my outcome. I got that knowledge. That knowledge was saying maybe I should just scoop now. I can't deal with what I'm seeing, right? But this card, you're so late in the game, the investment doesn't correlate to, I guess, the outcome. Like knowing that knowledge later in the game, like board presence is already there. Graveyards are established. Exiles have begun. All these zones are now visible to you as the opponent or the community, right?
Yep.
Depending on your environment.
Yep.
This card's just a little too late to actually get
to have an impact, even though it can, unlike all the other cards we've talked about, it can discard a land.
The only thing that's actually kind of neat about this card, the saving grace for this card, in Tumor X art in particular, is return target creature from your graveyard to your hand.
It's not bad.
Because by the time 4 has come around, something has died, right? That
Correct.
would be the only establishing grace for this, because at this point, sure, what May has in her hand, I need to know that. That would be great information. But again, going back to my point, battlefield is established. Graveyard is established or begun to become established. Exile pile has built up. Deck has diminished. The knowledge is starting to become present. That the knowledge has diminishing returns. It has a decaying return, in my opinion. Would you agree with that, Stu?
I would agree.
Yeah, it's kind of an early game play to know the information, to know what you're dealing with, and deciding if you can strategize to actually deal with this, yes or no.
Yeah, I would agree. So let's.
All right.
So
If that's okay, I would like to come in with a curveball.
please.
So, we've been talking a bit about peaks, Gataxian Probe, etc. Have you all ever heard of the card Urza, Glasses of Urza?
Of course.
Yeah, I've got a copy of it. It's been sitting in a box full of cards for about 18 years, and there it remains.
Yeah.
Still a
I
neat
sure
card,
do
though.
think that it's interesting that we have a way in all colors to look at our opponent's hand for 1 mana, and we could just repeatedly do that every turn. Where is this card going to be played? Probably not a lot of other places, because a lot of that information by itself is only helpful up to a point. What makes all these previous cards that we mentioned good is that they have some way of giving you either proactive ways of moving forward with it, or they don't cost you anything. Gataxian Probe, Peak, etc. They're all cantrips. They replace themselves. And in the case of Gataxian Probe, you don't even pay the mana for it. Versus in the case of Thoughtseizes, Vendilion Clicks, etc., they are proactive because it's like, all right, I am essentially trying to take a card out of your hand.
Or establish a threat.
What does Urza's Glasses do just to really establish the footprint there?
Yeah, because this is kind of an ancient card.
It's obscure.
Right? It's 20-something years old now.
Super, super obscure card. So it's a 1-mana artifact that says, tap, look at target's player's hand. That's it. No other text.
Because it's terrible.
That was my point that I was getting to, is that it's like, knowing what we know as curators, drafters, etc., that, hey, information is really, really valuable, but it sure is interesting how, despite having all that really useful, valuable information, it's not valuable enough to outweigh its place in its deck, in its card advantage slot, so to speak.
Pretty fascinating parallel to draw, right? You only have to pay 1 mana to bring it down, and then 1 mana to get what undoubtedly is not as much value as a repeatable effect, but compare that to something like Sensei's Divining Top, where you pay 1 mana to manipulate the top 3 cards of your library. Like, Sensei's Divining Top is a super powerful card. Glasses of Urza is an unplayable card for the most part.
It's not. You can actually go to Lens Crafters, get it BOGO. You can get it in Armani style. You can get it in...
Anthony will not be on
Get
the
the
next
one with
episode.
little cat ears. Anyways, my point is that when we're talking about information and how important it is, take it with a grain of salt and realize that when you're working on your package for your cubes, the game's not already lost just because your opponent managed to open with Thoughtseize. And in a lot of these environments, they're singleton. There's a lot of different environment considerations when you're playing around with these, and it's a fun little thought exercise of being like, at what point am I just playing a slightly better Urza's Glasses?
I just think it's basically distills down to that every one of these have diminishing returns, right? Like you were talking about, every one of these decay over time. The information is really great in the beginning, but there's a certain point where you're not going to invest that time or put the Urza's Glasses into your... It's sideboard relegated by just no matter what, right? Like there's no interest in actually including that. Whereas cards like Divest and these Duresses and all that, they're snappy plays, they're one-time turn and burns. But I think also another point that would be good was like the Urza's Glasses, that people like that interaction, but they also like that dynamics of play where I can do stuff like bring it back and do it again or whatever. It just feels more empowering than repeated gameplay. It almost feels like cheating whenever you're playing Urza's Glasses is what I'm trying to say in so many words, right? Like telepathy we talked about before, it feels like cheating. Doesn't feel like strategy. It's not the same vibe while playing the cube. Do you agree with that statement, May?
I wouldn't say that it feels cheaty. I feel The way that I see it is that you are essentially taking out a major aspect of Magic the Gathering, because one of the key aspects of this game is that we're navigating hidden information, and when you just put the spotlight on that hidden information, then the ruse is up. I know what you have, I know that you can't answer it, so I'm just going to do my game strategy. Or in the opposite degree of, I know I can't answer you, so...
Goes back to my original question, does the visibility of the hand correlate directly to the fun factor of the cube, right? I think there's definitely a bell curve that happens, and when it hits a certain point, it's not fun anymore, right?
I would actually argue that it's somewhat player dependent as well. I think some players are going to say, you know what, I don't mind if my hand is visible or my opponent knows what it is, right? Whereas some other players, like I would have certainly done many, many years ago when I first started, playing Magic and saw Thoughtseize, I would have said, this is nonsense. Like that seems broken and unfair to me. Nowadays, I have a different opinion of it.
Well, I think that's interesting. Let's go over to this next card that I think has actually taken all these ideas and culminated into one.
And I like this card very much. So this is a newer edition. This is a Vintage Cube edition as well. This is Concealing Curtains, 1 black for a creature, wall, Defender 0/4. You can pay 2 colorless, 1 black, transform Concealing Curtains as a sorcery, and it transforms into Revealing Eye, which is an eye horror. It's a 3/4 with Menace. When this creature transforms into Revealing Eye, target opponent reveals their hand. You may choose a non-land card from it. If you do that, player discards that card, then draws a card. So a little like Vendilion clicky.
That's what I was going to say. So I actually run this in my horror cube, but I run it for different reasons. It's pay 1 black, get a 0/4. It's a great way to stymie aggro with a delayed effect at your own, I guess, whenever you decide you want to invest to actually get the information or not, right? Like, this card gives you the choice as the player is, I just want a 0/4 wall. I'm quite okay with that. And, or I can pay 2 and 1 colorless, transform Concealing Wall into an actual threat, right? And start doing the thing and then get the Vendilion click type of effect. I am in love with this card. I don't think it's vintage power level. I'm like, when I saw that come up on the list, I was watching a lot of players and they were kind of like shrugging at this card. I am of the opinion this plays a lot better in some kind of thematic cubes, kind of emulating the idea of Vendilion Click, but not quite there. But yeah, I've got opinions about this one.
It's in vintage lists. I'm gonna tell you that right now. It's
medium.
In vintage
it's
lists.
Medium, in my opinion.
It's a strong ground defender with a threat built in and a disruptive effect.
And it's also not
for
really,
1 card.
It's not really what Black wants to be doing. Black wants to be kind of getting in there aggressive, in my opinion.
But you can't
in
always
my
be.
environment.
But you can't always be, right? If you're looking at Black as, you've got a Reanimator package or a Storm package, you're not always going to be able to go off. This gives you the ability to be able to hold the fort a little bit, gives you the ability to be able to, clear the way, if you will, right? I've now assembled my Reanimate or my Storm package. I'm going to play my 3 mana. I'm going to look at my opponent's hand. Do they have an exile effect? Do they have a devastating counterspell to my strategy? No. Okay. Hopefully the way is clear. If not this turn, then next turn. And it's a 3/4
I'm not
menace
terribly
threat.
incentivized to delay this, to be honest with you. Like, for me, the 1 black plus 2 colorless to transform it is actually a delayed impact of the game. And I think going back to the diminishing returns of that information, I don't think this has late game plays. That's where this card gets really odd. It's like doing a thing that you want to do early in the game. Vendilion Click is very aggressive. It plays into an aggressive stance. This card doesn't play aggressive. This is very control-y. But why am I incentivized to do the hand look, hand strip, whatever you want to call it, and then the counter draw? Down the road, this doesn't have timing aspects of the card it just doesn't fit for me in a vintage environment. I see this being a lot stronger than thematic. I've got May. You got thoughts?
I think that is just a good card. I don't think that trying to argue that whether or not it's impactful enough or evasive enough or insert in any other amounts of things. You are paying 1 mana for a 0/4 that can block. Great, perfect. Paying 3 to make it into a Vendilion Click. Great, perfect. The fact that it has Menace is great. However, I think that the one thing that would turn it from debatably good card into undeniably good card, and it's an aspect that we aren't really focusing on just because that's not just the context of the episode, but it innately lacks the flexibility because it just says target opponent and not target player. The thing that you'll note about things like Inquisition of Kozilek or Thoughtseize, you could target yourself to get your reanimate targets into the graveyard.
Well,
So-
Inquisition you're not going to use for a reanimate target because it's 3 or less, and you're never going to reanimate a 3 or less, right? And
Thoughtseize is what she's referring to.
And yeah, Thoughtseize is really the only one, right? Duress is target opponent, so you can't, but it's non-creature, and Inquisition is 3 value or less. Really,
You get what I'm saying, though.
yeah, Divest
They
is
get
actually
more
the best for that,
flexibility.
and Thoughtseize. So yeah,
People Thougeize themselves all the time, but a common...
I just did it this morning.
Well, a common misplay that happens all the time is whenever people Thoughtseize themselves to do a reanimator package in order to put it in the yard, is you then have to reveal your entire hand to your opponent. You now have to give that information as per the card to the opponent, right? So it's got its own little sway there.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say if I am using another effect, like an Entomb as an example, and I'm putting a Gristlebrand or an Atraxa or an Archon of Cruelty, the detrimental aspect of that is now my opponent knows my strategy and also knows that I'm, if I have the ability to reanimate it immediately, but if I'm putting an Atraxa in the yard with another card, with an Entomb as an example, they know what I'm doing anyway. So yeah. Maybe they know that I've got an Animate dead, but you know what? I'm going for that next turn regardless. Whether they know I've got an Animate dead or a Reanimate or whatever else, I'm still going for that. I'm not going to slow down just because they know what's in my hand.
I think the mini conversation that we were having is just the perfect case of when are you giving up that information for these cards, especially when you're in control of that. And I would dare to say that what makes cards like Thoughtseize so fun is that innate flexibility, because there are things to consider. It's just like, well, I'm going to be giving my opponents information if I'm doing the reanimator thing. I'm going to be attempting to do it now. I'm paying 1, I'm dumping Detraxa or whatever into the yard, and I'm trying to immediately use it. It doesn't matter if they know it at that point.
All right, so I think we've kind of done the black cards as good as we need to. We're going to talk quickly about a couple of the blue cards that have this effect. And I'm going to start out with these two, right? I'm just going to read them both out. The first one is Peak. This is a 1 blue mana instant. Look at target player's hand, draw a card. So very Gitaxian Probe adjacent, except there is not the Phyrexian mana option. And the other one is Clairvoyance, which is also look at target player's hand, but you draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep for 1 blue. Very, very close effects, obviously giving you all that information, and there is a replacement effect. So, and another blue one that I was interested in is Spy Network. So this is a 1 blue instant, look at target player's hand, the top card of that player's library, and any face-down creatures he or she controls, look at the top 4 cards of your library, then put them back in any order. I'm not going to lie, when I first saw this card, I was like, this is a really, really strong effect for only 1 blue mana at instant speed. You get the information. Face-down creatures, probably not as important nowadays, but getting to look at the top 4.
I got a counterpoint to that one immediately. This card might be something people might not sit on.
I think this is a sleeper.
Murders at Karlov Manor is going to be reintroducing basically like their own version of a morph mechanic.
Yes.
This card might be we might need to buy this one out really quickly.
Are we like MTG financing right now?
I think we might have to, because this card might get dumb fast, because you can get that knowledge of those cards, at least from a cube curation standpoint. I don't know, man. Like, that's not an irrelevant clause.
It's pretty niche, and I think it shows there's plenty of face-down cards right now.
The Monopoly might like this.
Well, let's look at it from a numbers perspective, right? So right now, in 361 to 450 and 451 to 540, this is seeing play in 10 and 12 cubes, respectively. That's 0.07%.
There's dozens of those!
And 0.1. There's literally 1 dozen. It's 77 at 541. Look, the large number curators, the 541 pluses, you're at 4.47%. That's 77 cubes. You guys are flying the flag for Spy Network. My hat is tipped to you guys. But yeah, it just doesn't see a whole lot of play, even with, and like I say, I think this is a pretty cool effect.
I didn't see this card or ever even have knowledge of this card prior to today, and I actually am interested for this from my Monopoly, where I'm kind of doing this Monopoly / meets Clue variant, so I can see where I'm going to include some of the murders of Karloff Manor in this. Karloff? Did I get that right?
Karloff Manor.
Yeah.
That's correct.
And I'm going to actually include this to actually get some information. So I think this is kind of a cool card.
Very nice. Very nice. Let's shift briefly over to red. May has a wonderful addition to the repertoire of cards. May, tell us what you've got.
So I actually have a really weird one. But it's Mindclaw Shaman, which is 4 in a red, Viashanu Shaman, 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals their hand. You may cast an instant or sorcery card from that player's hand without paying the mana cost. See, this card I like, even though it's a little expensive. It could be really fun in things like Live the Dream or slower environments that rely a lot on those instants and sorceries, and there's just a lot of really fun interactions that you can have with it, but the problem is that the floor is really bad. It is effectively just a vanilla 2/2 if you whiff.
Yeah,
So-
beautiful if you get like a cruel ultimatum, out of your opponent. Otherwise, maybe not quite as good. Sucks if they've just got a counter spell.
It's just a funny little pet card that I figured should get mentioned, just
like
because,
it.
hey, it does the similar shtick. It at least steals the card, unlike Reversal of Fortune.
Yeah, I like it.
So as we kind of come to conclusion how these type of cards can enrich your cube environments, we've already discussed how in certain instances they can detract and add to the fun. The question that I have for the audience is, does the knowledge increase your win rate, and what cost does that come to, right?
And the fun. Does it increase the fun?
Yeah, that's just like the variability of what we're doing here, right? Like back to my original recommendation, I truly believe that you should limit these across all these color bands, typically within black. That maybe you should limit these in order to keep the focus on black, in my opinion. But maybe 3 to 4, because their early gameplays, we talked about the Duresses and the Inquisition of Kozilix and the Gataxian Probes, and how they have like this place, like this namesake that holds them down. But after that point, they start having diminishing returns. May, do you have any thoughts on that?
Clearly, you just need to go into your cubes, replace every single discarding card with Glasses of Urza. Just all of them.
And on
I
that
want you all
note,
to just have 6 copies of Glasses of Urza in your cube. That is clearly just the objectively correct thing to do. They will definitely get drafted every time. Yes.
And if you're noticing that Glasses of Urza is completely bought out on TCG Player right now, just send us an email or shoot us a Discord message. May will be happy to sell you a copy for whatever 50 times the cost of the most recent sales are.
when it goes into Vintage Cube, I have 1 copy. So I hope this was a fun episode. And other than that, we're going to move over to our socials.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. We're going to move over to the socials, and I'm going to finish with a final thought here. This episode was definitely inspired by a comment I saw by Marshall Sutcliffe on LSV stream, and it was very simple. People win games when they have more information, and I think that kind of sums it up. I like having the information, and whether or not you think it's right for your cube, give us a shout. We'd love to hear. As always, we're going to start out with a huge shout out to all of our Patreons: Keaton, Lord Justice, Chris, Nicholas, Stephen, Preston, and Samuel. Big shout out and much love to all of you guys for the continued support. We thank you very much. And if you're interested in becoming a Patreon, then go check us out at www.patreon.com/UberCube. Anthony, things have been looking up pretty good on the Patreon, hey?
Where do we go when the beds are burning?
How do we sleep while our beds are burning? As always, if you love the show, we would truly appreciate a 5-star review on your chosen podcast platform. You can also support us by using our Alter Sleeves affiliate link, which is at www.altersleeves.com/UberCube to get 5% off your purchase. You can also use our Inked Gaming affiliate link. You can check that out on our Discord. Go and check them out for some cool playmats, dice bags, mouse pads, all kinds of cool and custom products for your cube or any other Magic the Gathering formats that you're into. You can reach us via Twitter. We are at UberCubeMTGPod. You can also reach us via email. We are UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. If you've got a longer question about the show, or if you've got an idea for a future episode, then we'd love to hear from you. And as always, come check out the Discord. We've got a link in the Twitter as well as in the show notes. We're growing. It's like maybe the fastest growing community in the world right now.
In the world.
All birth rates are dropping.
Small world.
UberCube Discord is growing like crazy.
Ice caps are melting.
Ice caps.
And beds are burning.
Anyways,
And beds are burning.
Little midnight oil
Something's
reference
turning.
for the listeners.
I
What are
think
we
that
learning?
it's time that we say the thing that we always say here on UberCube.
Happy cubing!